Douglas. Hanging with Mr. Douglas. Yeah, hanging. Hanging with Mr. Douglas. Yeah.
What's up, everybody? Thanks for hanging. We are continuing our journey down this very deep rabbit hole that I went down with Claude here. This is episode 3. We'll begin with Hathor, being, mechanism, and the deepest layer of the Egyptian cosmos. When was she first introduced? The origins of Hathor stretch back to the prehistoric period of Egyptian civilization, where she likely evolved from earlier cow goddesses worshipped in the Nile Delta. Archaeological evidence suggests that her cult began in the early dynastic period, possibly originating from the merger of several local fertility deities. Ancient texts describe her as one of the primordial forces of creation, existing even before the establishment of the formal Egyptian pantheon, that Aeneid we were talking about before, that the Nine so cleverly call themselves. Some creation myths position Hathor as the cosmic cow who gave birth to the sky itself, with her body forming the heavens and her milk creating the Milky Way. The most ancient datable evidence, a palette from approximately 3500 to 3200 BC, shows the silhouette of a cow's head with horns surrounded by stars, suggesting a cow deity linked with the sky. Now, despite these earlier precedents, Hathor is not unambiguously mentioned or depicted until the 4th dynasty, which is around 2613 to 2494 BC. I mean, that's a large stretch of time, of the Old Kingdom, although several artifacts that may refer to her date to the early dynastic period, 3100 to 2686 BC. It's thought that her worship was widespread even in the pre-dynastic period because she appears on the Narmer palette, one of the earliest historical documents in human civilization. The critical implication is Hathor predates the formation of the Egyptian pantheon. She's not a theological invention. She is a primordial intuition about something real, which the Egyptians then built a theology around. She's older than the Aeneid, older than Ra in his formalized solar theology, and older than the pyramid texts. Whatever she points at, it predates the religious systems that tried to explain her. Is she a being or is she a mechanism? Well, the theological answer is, ding, 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 both. And the distinction between the two is precisely what Egyptian theology refused to make, which is interesting and I would argue possibly a little bit more advanced. The key is the Eye of Ra concept, which is the central theological structure through which Hathor operates. The eye is not simply a metaphor. In Egyptian cosmology, Ra's eye is operative power in the world, the aspect of the solar divine that acts while Ra himself is. The eye goes out from Ra, functions in the world, and returns. Hathor is the eye in its benign, creative, generative mode. Sekhmet is the eye in its wrathful, destructive mode. This makes Hathor simultaneously a being with personality, mythology, and temple worship, the technology by which divine solar power interfaces with the material world, the principle of erotic creative attraction that draws the divine toward the human and the human toward the divine. Interesting when you think of it in the context of Chris Bledsoe's Hathor. In Western philosophical terms, she's something like what Aristotle called a formal cause, not merely a thing, but the form that makes the thing what it is. She is the form of divine to human connection itself. This is why she has so many names and avatars. She was known as the Great One of Many Names. Again, interesting, that's what she says when she's talking to Bledsoe. Every manifestation of divine beauty, love, erotic power, music, and intoxication in the material world is, in Egyptian theology, a local manifestation of the same underlying principle that Hathor is. Her counterpart, and the opposite, the Sekhmet revelation. Here, the Egyptian answer is far stranger and more sophisticated than a simple good-evil polarity. The Eye goddess in the form of Hathor is sent by Ra to punish rebellious humanity. She becomes the lioness god at Sekhmet and massacres the humans, but Ra decides to prevent her from killing all humanity, thanks Ra. He orders that beer be dyed red and poured out over the land, The eye goddess drinks the beer, mistaking it for blood, and her inebriated state reverts to being the benign and beautiful Hathor. Nothing wrong with a glass of wine. Sekhmet and Hathor are not opposites. They are the same force in different states of activation. We're shifting up to Sekhmet. Some myths suggest that Sekhmet and Hathor are two sides of the same goddess, showing the duality of their nature. The theological structure here is precise. Hathor equals the Eye of Ra in creative, connective, generative mode. Sekhmet equals the Eye of Ra in destructive, punitive, uncontrolled mode. The transformation between them is managed by intoxication, the red beer myth, which is itself one of Hathor's ritual technologies. The saving of mankind was commemorated every year on the feast day of Hathor Sekhmet. Everyone drank beer stained with pomegranate juice and worshipped the mistress and lady of the tomb, the gracious one, the destroyer of rebellion, mighty one of enchantments. The annual ritual reenacted the containment of divine destructive power through the same mechanism that originally unleashed it, intoxication. This is a technology of cosmic management. The priests who ran the festival understood that the same force that creates ecstatic connection can become annihilating destruction if it's not properly managed and periodically reintegrated. Stop at 3 drinks. The true opposite of Hathor is not Sekhmet, but implied rather than stated. It is the state in which the eye never returns to Ra, a permanent dissociation of the creative force from its divine source, operating in the world without grounding, without management, without the annual ritual of return. Feels a little bit like what we're going through in modern day, which is precisely what Asmodeus represents, referencing our previous conversation of Asmodeus and Raphael. He's not the opposite of Hathor. He is Hathor's principle captured, corrupted, and severed from its source, operating as pure possessive destruction without the regenerative cycle. Correlation to the archangel hierarchy. This is where the comparison becomes structurally elegant and surprising. The Eye of Ra as the Shekinah. The closest Jewish theological parallel to Hathor as Eye of Ra is the Shekinah, the divine feminine presence that dwells in the world, the immanent aspect of God that is present within Israel. The Shekinah is not separate, but the operative presence of the transcendent God in material realm. Sounds familiar. When the Shekinah is in exile, the world is broken. When it returns, the world is healed. This is functionally identical to the distant goddess myth. The eye leaving Ra causes chaos. Its return restores order. In Kabbalistic angelology, the Shekinah is associated with Malkuth, kingdom, the lowest sephirah on the tree of life, the one closest to the material world. Malkuth is the receiving principle, the cosmic feminine that receives divine light from above and distributes it to creation. This is Hathor's function exactly. The directional archangel correspondences. So in ceremonial magic and Kabbalistic angelology, the 4 archangels are placed at the cardinal directions as protectors. And you can see this in tarot cards as well in the world, as well as the Wheel of Fortune. East is Raphael, which represents the element air, and Raphael's domain is healing, breath, and dawn. The south is Michael, fire, protection, judgment, will. In the west, Gabriel, water, emotion, dreams, revelation. To the north, Uriel, earth, stability, grounding, death. Now, let's lay Hathor's domain over this. Hathor governs all 4 simultaneously. She is the principle that moves between the elements, connecting them. She is precisely what the archangel perimeter encloses and protects. Michael and Sekhmet, both are the fierce, fire-bearing warrior aspect of divine power, sent to destroy what threatens cosmic order. The correspondence is so close as to be structural. Raphael and Hathor, both govern medicine, healing, and protection of legitimate love and union. Both use natural materials, fish organs, herbs, and music as their healing technology, and both operate through relationship and accompaniment rather than remote command. Gabriel and Thoth, or Thoth, or Toth, or Thoth. In the distant goddess myth, it's Thoth that was sent by Ra to find the wrathful eye in the wilderness and coax her back. Thoth is the divine messenger, the god of writing, wisdom, and sacred communication. The Egyptian counterpart of Gabriel, his task, restoring the broken connection between divine power and its source, maps directly onto Gabriel's function as divine messenger and revealer. For Uriel, there's no direct Hathor-mapped equivalent here, but Nephthys, the hidden sister, the goddess of transition and the threshold of death, comes closest. The critical difference, the archangels are discrete beings with individual natures and portfolios. Hathor is a divine principle that manifests through multiple forms. Not a failure of Egyptian theology to distinguish, it's a fundamentally different cosmological architecture. Where the Abrahamic tradition says God has 7 messengers, each with a specific function, Egyptian theology says God has one operative power that manifests in 7 ways. Both are attempting to describe the same underlying reality of how divine energy interfaces with the world. They just use different grammars. Hathor, the 9, and the fallen, the precise mechanism. Now the synthesis tightens into something genuinely important. The Watchers descended through Eros. Kind of. Through the desire of the divine for the human. Hathor governs Eros as a cosmic principle. She is literally the divine principle of what the Watchers experience, this attraction of a higher ontological order toward a lower one, expressed through desire. This makes Hathor not a fallen entity and not a malevolent one, but the principle that the fallen entities hijack. Just as a virus doesn't create the cell it infects, but exploits an existing cellular mechanism, the fallen angels and the 9 don't create erotic or ecstatic attraction. They exploit a principle that was always already built into the structure of creation. Hathor, in her proper functioning, is a divine solar power that flows down through the eye, enters the world as creative, generative, healing love, and returns to its source in the continuous cycle of devotion and renewal. The Watcher 9 mechanism is that same kind of downward flow, but intercepted. The return cycle is broken and the generative energy is extracted without return. What Dr. Lin, highly recommend her Substack, calls loosh, which is what Robert Monroe coined, he called that the energy that's parasitically harvested from human emotional experience. The Festival of Drunkenness, as the annual ritual, was the Egyptian technology for preventing this from happening at the cosmic level, periodically reintegrating the eye's power with its source through ritual dissolution and return. When the ritual stops, the eye goes permanently Sekhmet. So I asked Claude, what about the good guy path? What can we do that would not be so transgressive? Now, this is the most important question that Claude tells me, and it has a precise answer across multiple traditions. We're going to lay it out. The core principle. What these entities actually require. Every tradition that deals with this problem, whether Enochian, Kabbalistic, Christian, Hermetic, or Egyptian, converges on the same observation about what entities like the Watchers and the 9 require to operate through human beings. They require a vacancy. The technologies that facilitate their entry, trance, intoxication, sexual frenzy, sensory overwhelm, extreme isolation, sleep deprivation, they all function by the same mechanism. They temporarily suspend the human's own consciousness and will, creating a gap that the entity can occupy. The human body becomes apparatus because the human self has been temporarily evacuated. Right, so the implication is direct. The path of genuine ascension moves in the opposite direction, not toward emptiness, but toward fullness. Not toward suspension of consciousness, but toward its intensification. Not toward the dissolving of the individual self, but toward its completion. And again, I will say that there's room for the ritual technologies of isolation, sleep deprivation, that's okay as long as you're doing it with strong intention. You know why you're doing it, you know why you're there. Guardrails are good. From the Abrahamic and Kabbalistic tradition, Devekut and Tzelem Elohim. That's Devekut and Tzelem Elohim. The Kabbalistic concept of Devekut, cleaving or adhesion to God, describes a state of consciousness so continuously oriented toward the divine source that there's no gap, no vacancy, no window of disconnection through which a lower entity can operate. It's not trance. It's the precise opposite of trance, an actively intensified awareness of one's relationship with the divine ground of being. Now, the theological basis says humans are made of B'Tselem Elohim, B''Tzelem Elohim, in the image of God, Genesis 1:27. This is not merely a metaphor in the biblical sense. And again, I'm not subscribing to any of this. This is an exploration, and we're using this vocabulary and terminology to explore and expand awareness. So in Kabbalistic thought, the divine image is a functional reality, a genuine ontological participation in divine nature that, when fully activated, constitutes a kind of divine signature that lower entities can't replicate or replace. An entity may be able to operate through a human who doesn't know what they are, can't operate through a human who's fully, actively, and consciously themselves, because what they are is the image of God, and the image functions as a natural barrier. The specific practice. Hitbonenut, Hitbonenut, the active contemplative engagement with divine ideas, not passive receptivity to incoming spiritual signals. You're building, not opening. You're filling, not emptying. From the Tobit narrative, we have already explored Raphael in depth, but notice how exactly Tobias operates, because the text gives us this precise protocol for a human who encounters demonic interference and prevails. He's on a mission. He's not seeking mystical experience, but he's engaged in a practical task of service to humanity. He's accompanied. He is not isolated. Raphael travels with him. That's community, friendship, and witness, which are structural protections. He learns rather than channels. Raphael teaches him. He doesn't open himself to receive. He receives instruction and acts. He acts. It's him. He acts himself. He burns the fish organs. That's the protective action, which is performed by the human, not delegated to an angel. He prays before vulnerability. The wedding prayer in Tobit 8:5-7 is a conscious alignment with divine order, specifically at the moment of maximum potential intrusion. He's grounded in love for a specific person. It's not an abstract spiritual pursuit. Asmodeus's obsession with Sarah was possessive and abstract. Tobias's love is particular, personal, and reciprocal. The result is that Asmodeus flees from the smell of the burning fish from a material, embodied and practically executed as an act by a grounded human male operating under genuine angelic instruction. He does not flee from a spiritual ritual, he flees from a human being who knew what he was doing and why. Tobias knew what he was about. He was going in, eyes open. From the Christian mystical tradition, Theosis and the Armor of God. This is a neat section. I appreciate this section. The Hesychast tradition. I'm probably not saying that right at all. Hesychast. Sounds like a cat. Particularly as practiced by the Desert Fathers and systematized by Gregory Palamas, developed a specific technology for continuous consciousness called the Jesus Prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Practice continuously, synchronized with breathing until it becomes involuntary. Very much like mantras. The mechanism is precise. Continuous interior prayer leaves no gap. An entity that requires vacancy to operate finds no vacancy. The continuous movement of consciousness toward its divine source is itself the protection. Not because it calls in external protection, though it does that too, but because it constitutes a mode of being that is structurally incompatible with parasitic intrusion. The armor of God. In Ephesians 6, this is also worth checking out with fresh eyes. This is from Paul. He describes the belt of truth. Paul describes the belt of truth as the foundational garment. Entities that operate through deception can't penetrate a consciousness that has truth as its core orientation. The breastplate of righteousness. Ethical integrity as structural armor, not moralism, but the genuine alignment of will and action with divine order. The shield of faith. Active trust in the divine source, which is the functional opposite of anxious openness that entities exploit. Anxiety runs abound these days. Pull up that shield of faith. The helmet of salvation, the protection of the mind specifically, consciousness identified with its divine origin cannot be displaced. That also reminds me of a Dr. Lin article that I had tweeted about a little while ago. talking about how guarding your gates are your eyes. You are the one that must consciously decide what goes in, because what goes in is going to shape what comes out. So, guard your gate. Check out Dr. Lynn's Substack. I'm not paid by her. It's just really good writing. The sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. The active use of divine truth as an offensive instrument, not merely defensive posture. This is a complete system. Notice what's absent: passive meditation, trance, receptivity, opening. The entire structure is active, clothed, armored, and offensive. Again, there is a place for meditation. There is a place for receptivity in a way, dreams. We become receptive in dreams. I don't want to just cut everything out whole cloth, because I think that all of these things are spiritual tech. From the Egyptian tradition, Ma'at as the core technology. Is it Ma'at? Is it Ma'at? M-A'-A-T? I don't know. We're going to say Ma'at just because it's easier. The weighing of the heart, in which Anubis weighs the deceased's heart against the feather of Ma'at, is usually read as a post-mortem judgment, but it describes something that should be operative in life: the continuous alignment of one's inner self with Ma'at. Truth, cosmic order, justice, right relationship. Don't be an a-hole. The feather is the lightest possible thing. The heart that weighs the same as the feather is a heart so transparent to truth that there is no density of untruth, no self-deception or hidden agenda in it. It can't be grabbed because there's nothing to grab. It can't be corrupted because there's no corruption already present. The priests of Sekhmet, who were simultaneously physicians and ritual managers of the most dangerous divine power in the Egyptian cosmos, understood this explicitly. They managed Sekhmet through knowledge and ritual rather than through avoidance or surrender. You don't escape the eye's power by pretending it doesn't exist. You manage it by understanding it precisely, aligning yourself with Ma'at, and performing the ritual of return, the annual festival of drunkenness that reintegrates the dangerous power with its divine source. Instead of going to town at the candy shop, get yourself a bar of chocolate and have it handy. The Raphael protocol as synthesis. So when we pull all this together, the good guy path that addresses my question has some of these components. Know the landscape, number one. This entire conversation is itself protective. Expanding awareness does give us more solid ground to at least look at and consider. The entities described, whether they're watchers, the 9 demonic figures like Asmodeus, whatever, operate most powerfully through ignorance. Right? These grays abducting people mess with our minds and are absolutely leaning on the scales of tilted situational awareness to be, just at a surface level. The moment you can name, categorize, and understand what you're dealing with, you are already on stronger ground. Raphael taught Tobias what the fish organs were before any demon appeared. Preparation precedes encounter. What are those 5 P's? Prior prudent planning prevents piss-poor performance. Tobias. 2. Maintain continuous consciousness. The Hesychast Jesus prayer is one form of this. Ethical integrity and intellectual honesty are others, mantras. The goal is a consciousness that is never genuinely vacant, never in the dissociated, emptied state that entities require. Trance practices, unless conducted with exceptional preparation and community support, have a trance buddy, operate exactly the gaps these entities exploit. 3. Operate through relationship, not isolation. I often operate through isolation, and I seem to be okay. So there's a space for some hermiting, for sure, but I still agree with number 3 here, for the most part. The Watchers descended to Mount Hermon and swore their oath in secret. The 9 operated through isolated channelers in private laboratories. Asmodeus attacked in the private space of the marriage bed. Every entity in this territory operates through isolation and secrecy. They take you in the middle of the night from your bed when no one else is looking. Authentic spiritual community, whether it's a religious congregation, a genuine teacher-student relationship, or accountable friendship, provides witness and correction that entities can't survive. 4. Ground in the particular and the practical. Tobias was on a practical errand to recover money. He's not seeking mystical experience. It's his love for Sarah that was particular, for her, not the idea of love. The entities in this discussion consistently operate through abstraction. Grand cosmic narratives, collective energies, universal principles. The specifically particular, the person, the task, the moment, this commitment, grounds consciousness in a way that resists the abstract sweep of cosmic claims. 5. Invoke Raphael specifically. This is textually grounded and not merely symbolic. Raphael's function, confirmed in both Tobit and the Testament of Solomon, where Asmodeus himself names Raphael as what frustrates him, is precisely the protection of human love, health, and life from demonic interference. The name itself functions as what the sigil encodes, the divine healing principle made present. In both Jewish and Christian traditions, the invocation of Raphael by name is the specific counter-operation to Asmodeus-type interference. 6. Cultivate the opposite of what the entities exploit. They exploit lust. Cultivate committed love. They exploit intoxication. Cultivate sobriety and clarity, or, limit yourself to 3. They exploit secrecy. Cultivate transparency. Again, have a trance buddy. They exploit the body as an apparatus. Cultivate the body as a temple. They exploit passive receptivity. Cultivate active discernment. That one, 100%. They exploit isolation. Cultivate community. Each perversion they operate through has a precise, authentic counterpart that is structurally inaccessible to them. 7. Understand Hathor in her proper function. The force that entities hijack, erotic attraction, ecstatic experience, the crossing of the boundary between the inner and the outer, is not itself the enemy. Suppressing Eros entirely doesn't protect you. It just leaves the field unmanaged. Those thorns grow wild. The Egyptian priests of Sekhmet and Hathor knew that they had to work with the eye's power, not pretend it wasn't there. The goal is not the elimination of erotic, ecstatic, or connective experience, but its proper orientation toward the genuine other, toward specific love, toward the divine source that those experiences, rightly held, actually point to. Hathor in her proper function is herself a form of grace. Sekhmet unmanaged is the same force become catastrophic. The path that puts you on equal or stronger footing is not a counter-ritual that matches the fallen tradition's technology. It's a mode of being, active, integrated, discerning, rational, truth-aligned, and specifically loved. That constitutes the opposite of the vacancy they require. There's no gap in a life fully, consciously, and lovingly inhabited. And hey, that's, especially today, that is not like a small order, though it is totally attainable as a practice. It's not going to be complete every day, but it's definitely attainable as a practice. So then I asked, what questions am I not asking? Where am I not looking? Let's look at some more angles. Give me the stuff that I just haven't touched upon yet. So Claude comes back with a couple of threads. Thread 1, the human who ascended. Who is Enoch? And why is he the most important figure in this entire conversation? I don't know, you tell me. This is the most glaring gap. We have been discussing the Book of Enoch extensively without properly examining Enoch himself. He's the pivotal figure that answers most of everything, or at least gives us a very clear perspective into some answers that we can explore. Enoch is the one human in all of this who went the other direction. The Watchers descended illegally from divine to human. They transgressed. Enoch ascended illegally from human to divine. He walked that path. Genesis 6:24 says simply, Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. I will also say it sounds like he got picked up, consciously. Daylight. Zoop. No death, no body, a human being taken directly into divine presence. Yeah. Picked up by a craft of some kind. Which very well could be, spiritual conscious technology. Very interesting. Was it sentient plasma that pulled him up and wrapped him in a sheath and showed him all the stuff that he was shown? A whole bunch. In later Jewish mysticism, Enoch becomes Metatron, the highest archangel, the one who's called the Lesser Yahweh. That's wild. who sits at the boundary between God and creation, and through him all divine transmission to humanity passes. He holds the celestial records. He's the angelic scribe, and he was once a dude. This is the complete answer to my good guy ascension question. I mean, in this category of vocabulary, sure. Not as a theory, but as a documented case. As a human being, by walking continuously with God, he became the very archangel through which divine knowledge legitimately reaches humanity. The Watchers came down through desire. Enoch went up through righteous relationship. Metatron is the proof of concept that human consciousness can cross the ontological boundary in the upward direction and return transformed rather than consumed. So what happened when Enoch tried to intercede for the Watchers? This was fascinating. This is one of the most theological devastating moments in all of 1 Enoch, and almost no one discusses it. The Watchers, imprisoned and desperate, came to Enoch and said, to this human, they asked him to write a petition and intercede for them before God. And he does. He sits at the waters of Dan and reads their petition. Then the divine response comes, and it contains one of the most profound reversals in all of sacred literature, and this is God speaking to the fallen through Enoch. God says to the fallen, you ought to petition on the behalf of humans, not humans on the behalf of you. Why have you left the high, holy, and eternal heaven and lain with women and defiled yourselves with the daughters of men? The Watchers, being of a higher ontological order, are asking a human to intercede for them. The hierarchy has inverted. A human, through righteous relationship with God, has become more authoritative before the divine throne than the fallen divine beings. This directly answers the question of human footing against such entities. The path of ascension that Enoch represents doesn't just put a human on equal footing, it puts him on superior footing. And the Watchers themselves knew it. Thread 2, the Nephilim's afterlife, where demons might actually come from. What happened to these spirits of the Nephilim after the flood killed their bodies? This is the missing link between the Watcher tradition and the ongoing demonic interference we've been discussing, and almost no popular treatment mentions it. Well, we're mentioning it now. In 1 Enoch 15:8-12, we get an extraordinary answer. God tells Enoch that the Nephilim were born from the union of divine spirits, the Watchers, and human bodies. When their bodies were destroyed in the flood, their spirits, being a mix of divine and human nature, had nowhere to go. They were neither fully angelic, so they couldn't return to heaven. They weren't fully human, so they couldn't go to the place of the dead. They became the wandering spirits, the jinn, the demons that afflict humanity from that point forward. This means that every demon in the tradition, including Asmodeus, might be a Nephilim spirit. Not a fallen angel proper, but the disembodied offspring of the Watcher union. The motivation framework shifts completely. These are not beings who chose to fall. They're beings who never had a choice about existing. That's a messed up situation, man. They were trapped between worlds and driven by the half-divine, half-human hungers that produced them. Asmodeus' obsessive, possessive behavior towards Sarah makes perfect sense in this framework. He's not an angel enacting an ideology. He's a disembodied spirit that once had a body and is desperate to re-enter the material world through any available mechanism, and expresses that desperation through the erotic possession that was the very point of his origin and existence. Oh, I mean, that's a sad story. I'm sorry, Nephilim. Is there a way to redeem the Nephilim? I don't know. The thread connects directly to everything we discussed about entities requiring human bodies as apparatus and explains why they need them. Thread 3, the legitimate knowledge transmitter. Who is Thoth? And is he the Egyptian counterpart of both Raphael and Enoch? Thoth is the figure in Egyptian theology who does legitimately what the Watchers did illegitimately. He's the god who brings back the distant eye, Sekhmet, the figure sent by Ra to restore the broken connection between divine power and its source. And we identified this as Gabriel's role in the Abrahamic tradition. The god of writing, wisdom, sacred knowledge, and all transmitted knowledge, the legitimate teacher. The one who weighs the heart of judgment with Mot, the arbiter of truth. He's the teacher of Isis, who uses his knowledge to resurrect Osiris, the most powerful magical act in Egyptian mythology. In the Hermetic tradition, identified as Hermes Trismegistus, thrice greatest Hermes, the author of the Emerald Tablet and the 42 Hermetic texts, which became the foundation of Western esoteric philosophy. Sometimes identified as an earlier incarnation of Enoch himself in synchronous traditions. You have to wonder how much people were doing that. It seems like it was happening just laying over top all the time just to get the meaning of it. Maybe you guys will understand it this way, okay? Thoth is like Enoch. It's one of the three. Make sense of it. One of the questions I haven't asked is, Thoth a third figure alongside Raphael and the Watchers, a third model of how divine knowledge reaches humanity. This also, to me, makes it seem like this situation has happened more than once to humanity as a species. The Watchers gave knowledge through illegitimate boundary crossing. Raphael gives knowledge through divine commission and accompaniment. Thoth Hermes gives knowledge through the written transmission of cosmic principles. The book, the texts, the sacred knowledge, all three are operating at the same problem. How does what is above reach that what is below? They represent three radically different answers with radically different consequences. Thread 4. Matsema and the deliberate permission. That's M-A-S-T-E-M-A. In the Book of Jubilees, why does God leave 1/10 of fallen spirits free? And who asked for that? Thanks, God. The Book of Jubilees gives an account of the aftermath of the flood that is profoundly different from 1 Enoch and directly relevant to my question about a good guy protection situation. After the flood, the Nephilim spirits, the demons, begin afflicting Noah's descendants. Noah prays. God sends his angels to bind all the demons in the pit. Then a figure called Mastema, M-A-S-T-E-M-A, Mastema, not Matsema, Mastema, the chief of the demonic spirits, approaches God and makes a legal argument. If all the spirits are bound, he cannot fulfill his function of testing humanity. He asks that 1/10 of the spirits be left free. Oh, how'd they decide which ones got left? Was it a lottery? Was it like, did they play poker? How did they figure out, draw straws? What did they do? Rock, paper, scissors. That's where it comes from. God agrees. 1/10 of the demonic spirits remain free on earth, specifically to test, afflict, and be available to those who choose to use them. That's an interesting statement. This is a radically different cosmological structure from what most people assume. The demonic interference is not an accident or a cosmic failure. It's deliberate permission, granted by divine authority with a specific functional purpose. The implication is that the question is not how do I avoid all supernatural contact, but how do I navigate a cosmos that is intentionally structured to include testing forces? Neat way to describe why there is seemingly such pointed maliciousness in the world at times. Mastema is also identified in some scholarship with the figure who hardens Pharaoh's heart and who tested Abraham, roles traditionally assigned to Satan. But in Jubilees, he's neither omnipotent nor beyond divine control. He's permitted adversarial function. Understanding this completely reframes the spiritual warfare question. Thread 5. The feminine as the hinge point. What's the specific role of the sacred feminine in both the exploitation path and the ascension path? And are Sophia, the Shekinah, Isis, and Mary pointing at the same thing Hathor points at? We touched on the Shekinah-Hathor parallel, but this thread deserves its full excavation. Across traditions, the divine feminine appears as the hinge point, the principle through which the divine intersects with the material world. And in every tradition, the hinge point is simultaneously the site of the greatest vulnerability to exploitation and the site of the deepest path of legitimate ascension. Sophia in Gnosticism, her fall into matter creates the demiurge and the imprisoning cosmos. Her restoration is the goal of Gnostic salvation. She is both the cause of the problem and the solution. The Shekinah in Kabbalah, which is the feminine divine presence that dwells in the world. When Israel sins, the Shekinah goes into exile. When Israel returns, the Shekinah returns. The entire Kabbalistic project of Tikkun Olam, Tikkunolam, which means world repair, is about restoring the Shekinah to union with the masculine divine. When it comes to Isis, the supreme magician who uses Thoth's knowledge to reassemble Osiris's body and resurrect him, she's simultaneously the mother of Horus, the legitimate divine order, and the most powerful operative force in Egyptian magic. When it comes to Mary in Christianity, the Theotokos, the Theotokos, the God-bearer, The human woman who willingly consents, let it be done to me according to your word, becomes the hinge point through which the divine enters the material realm in the most radical possible way. Her fiat is the counter pattern to Eve's transgression and to the Watcher's forced descent. Some of them. The question my conversation is circling around, without quite landing on, is there a specific relationship between the divine feminine principle and the mechanism the fallen entities exploit? If Hathor governs the territory of divine human erotic connection, and if that is exactly what the Watchers and the Nine exploit, then the divine feminine is not incidentally present in the story, she's structurally central to it. The fallen pattern is the violation of the feminine as the interface. The ascension pattern is the restoration of the feminine as the properly functioning interface. Tobias and Sarah's marriage, restored by Raphael, is not merely a love story, it's the restoration of the proper relationship between the masculine and feminine as the vehicle through which divine blessing flows into the material world, the precise inversion of what Asmodeus is doing. Thread 6. The geography of contact. Why Mount Hermon specifically? Are there other geographic contact zones that appear consistently across traditions? Real quick, Patrice Chaplin's book, The Portal, apparently there's a legit portal up on Mount Canigou. Great book. Highly recommend reading it. So the Watchers descended to Mount Hermon, a specific peak in the intersection of modern Lebanon, Syria, and Israel, approximately 9,232 feet tall. This is not symbolic geography. Archaeological excavations at the summit have found remains of a significant ancient temple, one of the highest temples ever built in the ancient world. The site was a major cult center in the ancient Near East, and the name Hermon derives from a Hebrew root meaning sacred or consecrated. The area was associated with the Bashan region, which biblical texts treat with unusual theological weight. Og, the king of Bashan, described as the last of the Rephaim, the giants and Nephilim descendants, the Psalms describe Bashan as a place of particular divine intensity. This raises the question not asked, are specific geographic locations genuine contact zones, places where the boundary between ontological levels is thinner, or is the geography symbolic? If the Watchers chose Hermon deliberately, what was it about the specific location? Maybe it was just close. Does the ancient cultic use of high places, mountains, elevated temples, reflect genuine phenomenology of contact, or is it purely metaphorical? Probably there's some actual, they don't have to come down as far, The consistent pattern across traditions, from Sinai, Hermon, Olympus, Heliopolis, Glastonbury, Delphi, they all suggest that ancient peoples detected something real about specific locations as sites of heightened contact. Whether this is geographical, geological, astronomical, or purely psychological is one of the genuinely open empirical questions in this territory. Maybe we'll find out. Thread 7. Sound as both technology and protection. Why does music appear on both sides of this equation, as a summoning technology and as a protective force? This is one of the most underexplored threads, but we're going to consider it. Hathor's primary instrument is the sistrum, a rattle percussion instrument used in her temple worship. The sound of the sistrum was believed to drive away malevolent forces and to summon Hathor's presence. It's simultaneously protective and invocatory. David's lyre playing drove away the evil spirits from Saul. In 1 Samuel 16:23, this is the explicit exorcism by music in canonical scripture. Get out of here, demons. Go away tonight. That's my song. The Festival of Drunkenness used music along with alcohol to transform Sekhmet back to Hathor. The pacification of destructive divine power through sonic ritual. The Pythagorean tradition. They held that specific musical intervals, the music of the spheres, corresponded to the planetary intelligences, the same intelligences associated with the archangels, and used in constructing sigils via magic squares, which we discussed earlier. The solfeggio frequencies. The ancients used the specific tones in healing, and they are also a part of the same tradition. Dr. Lin's article, A Specific Geometry of Rituals, includes sonic geometry. The frequency and rhythm of the ritual creates the conditions. The question, Is there a precise theory of how sound operates on the boundary between ontological levels? Why does the sistrum drive away malevolent forces while Hathor's festival music summons her? What's the difference between sound that opens a door and sound that closes one? This thread connects directly to the physics of consciousness, to the resonance theory underlying the sigil construction we discussed, and one of the most practically applicable aspects of the entire territory. And you know what Terence McKenna says? If you're having a bad trip, sing. That's actually his advice. If you're having a bad trip, sing. You start taking in a whole bunch more oxygen. You're resonating in your body, which does feel good. Have a tune ready. I like Always Look on the Bright Side of Life by Monty Python. That always gets me chuckling. Thread 8. The prophecy versus channeling distinction. What's the precise theological and phenomenological difference between biblical prophecy and modern channeling? And does the difference matter? I mean, I think there's a spectrum we're exploring. We've discussed channeling extensively, the Nine, the Frankist Iber doctrine, but never precisely defined what makes it different from the prophetic tradition in which Enoch, Daniel, Isaiah, and others received genuine divine communication. The distinctions the traditions draw are sharp. Prophecy is typically unsought, often unwanted, and frequently uncomfortable for the recipient. It doesn't require trance states or special preparation. It commands rather than seduces. Channeling typically requires specific conditions: altered states, receptive posture invitation, often specific ritual preparation. It presents itself as offering rather than commanding. Biblical prophets maintained their full consciousness and were held accountable for what they transmitted, although sometimes it was in dreams. They were tested against existing revelation. False prophecy was punishable by death. The tradition took seriously the possibility of false transmission. Imagine if we still did that with everybody who said the world's going to end in 2012. Channeled entities typically present themselves as benevolent, flattering, cosmically significant, and not subject to testing against any external standard. The Ignatian tradition of discernment of spirits is the most systematic attempt to answer this question. Genuine divine communication proposes peace, clarity, and conformity to previously established truth. False spiritual communication produces excitement, flattery, urgency, and novelty that contradicts established truth. The emotional signatures differ. The fruit differs over time. That's for sure. Dr. Lin yet again wrote a wonderful article about what we're going through today with this whole disclosure situation that's been going on. She traces it back, interestingly enough, to Lamb when Crowley did his working and spoke to a being that looked surprisingly like a gray. So this distinction matters enormously for evaluating everything from the Nine to any contemporary spiritual practice that involves receiving messages from non-human intelligences. Thread 9. Connections to Sumerian cosmology. Are the Anunnaki the same beings as the Watchers? And what does the Sumerian tradition add to this picture? Well, the Sumerian Anunnaki, literally those of royal blood or those who came from heaven to earth, are the divine beings in Mesopotamian cosmology who taught civilization to humanity. The parallels to the Watcher tradition are so close that scholars debate whether the Enochian tradition is directly derived from Sumerian sources, or whether both are encoding the same historical or phenomenological reality. Either it happened a bunch, or it is a retelling. It's interesting. Is this all just a rehash of what happened once and different civilizations are trying to use their vocab to make it make sense? The Anunnaki connection adds the specific claim that these beings created humanity or modified existing hominids as a labor force, a far more pragmatic and less romantic account than the Watcher tradition's narrative of desire. The figure of Enki, the Sumerian god of wisdom, freshwater, and civilization, who gives knowledge to humanity specifically against the wishes of Enlil, the chief god, this maps almost exactly onto Prometheus Watcher Gnostic Liberator framework. A wise cosmic being gives humanity knowledge against the wishes of the chief divine authority. The Epic of Gilgamesh. I remember reading all of the Sitchin books and thinking, man, this Enki guy seems pretty chill. He's doesn't want us to be totally wiped out, and his brother seems like an a-hole. The Epic of Gilgamesh, which contains a flood account remarkably parallel to Noah's, predating the Genesis account by centuries, and Gilgamesh's own quest for immortality, which involves crossing the waters of death to reach Utnapishtim, the flood survivor. This is the Mesopotamian version of the human ascension quest. The Sumerian material provides the oldest archaeological substrate for everything the Enochian and biblical traditions are working with, and examining it would add both historical grounding and significant complication to any simple narrative about what these entities are and what they want. The capstone question: what would it look like to construct a complete, internally consistent, cosmological map that accounts for everything this conversation has touched? The archangels, the watchers, the Nephilim as demons, Enoch's ascent, Hathor, the Nine, the Frankish tradition, and the good guy path in a single framework. No single tradition does this completely. The Kabbalistic tree of life comes close. It maps divine hierarchy, angelic functions, the structure of creation and fall, and the path of return. And it was deliberately constructed to synthesize Jewish, Neoplatonic, Hermetic, and Christian elements. But it doesn't include the Egyptian material. The synthesis that our conversation has been building toward has some of these elements: the Enoch Metatron axis as the proof of legitimate ascension, the Watcher taxonomy as a precise map of how divine to human boundary violations manifest, Hathor Sekhmet as the Egyptian encoding of the operative principle that both legitimate assumption and demonic exploitation work through, Raphael as the specific divine function assigned to protect the interface between human love and life and demonic interference. The Frankist and Nine tradition are the modern operational form of the Watcher technology. The Tobias pattern as the practical template for a grounded, protected human navigating this territory. The question that I didn't ask is whether these can be assembled into something coherent enough to be genuinely useful, not as a new religion, but as a working map of the territory that we have been exploring. That synthesis, which would draw on Kabbalah, comparative mythology, Hermetic philosophy, and the primary texts that we've discussed, is the conversation that we would naturally flow toward. We would also need to honestly account for what none of these traditions fully resolve. Whether these beings described, the Nine, the Watchers, the Archangels, the Jinn, all the discarnate spirits that seem to spin up some esoteric claptrap, are ontologically real, independent entities, archetypical structures of consciousness, psychological projections of collective human experience. I would like to add perhaps non-corporeal plasma beings, or some relationship among all of these that our current frameworks aren't quite adequate to describe. The epistemological question sits underneath everything and is the one most deserving of a sustained, honest attention. Well, that's what we'll address next episode. Thanks for hanging. I'll catch you on the next one, where we go into the beginning of building what we can do about it, how we can build the map.
Hang on, Mr. Douglas. Yeah.